Carrie Oster, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your memories of the tornado that swept through Joplin like almost 11 years ago now. We're
Yeah.
coming up right on the 11th anniversary.
Yes.
Um, where were you the evening of the tornado, May 22nd, 2011?
My wife and I were at home. We lived in Carl Junction, Missouri, which is, I don't know, 14 miles north and a little west of Joplin. It's very close. And there was the storm was, there, the trees were blowing, a little rain, but I mean, it was just like a thunderstorm, And I actually was taking a phone call. I can't remember who was calling me, and some telemarketer. And I've done that type of work in the past. So when I would get those calls, I would be nice and gracious and answer.
Oh,
There was a survey of some kind,
okay.
So I was on the phone when it was happening, and then my wife was
Wow.
watching TV, and then our daughter started messaging her and saying all the places that were being damaged and how this tornado was going through Joplin. And she named St. John's, which we both worked together there. And that's really how we met years ago and before we got married.
Were you working at St. John's at the time of the tornado?
No.
Okay. But you had worked there in the past.
Yeah. I left, I don't know, 20 years or so before, a long time. Yeah, maybe longer, probably longer. But then she mentioned a couple other places, and then she said Walmart. And my wife said, well, which one? Because there's three. And she said the one at 15th in Range Line. Well, my parents lived probably 5-6 blocks from there. And she said that it was leveled. And of course, I don't know where she's getting her information. I don't know if it's off the news, and even the news can not be accurate during an actual crisis of that size happening,
Right.
So anyway, I was like, oh my gosh, we got to go,
Wow.
So we took off and went. It was the school board office at 15th and Connecticut, and we parked in their parking lot and walked across the street. And as we stepped across the street, 15th Street, of course, as you're walking up to it, you could see all the damage, but it was like, I don't know, that step was like walking onto a movie step. All of a sudden, it was just so surreal. Like, how can this be? It was
just the incredible destruction.
Yeah, it was like felt like you were on a movie set, because like a bomb had gone off, a huge bomb, because like all around you, everywhere you looked, you couldn't see anything. It was just this destruction,
Wow.
There's definitely houses, intact, and houses gone, and trees down, and just lightning, poles knocked over and wires on the ground. Everything was dead at that time.
Yeah.
But God's timing was amazing, because as we walked across the street and I'm kind of looking around, my wife she was on my left, and she looked across Connecticut on the other side.
Yeah.
And my brother was right across the street, walking the same parallel. And so we met up, and then we walked together. It's probably 4 blocks to their house. And now just taking it all in, like we're not really talking much or anything, because like you're in shock.
Right. How long after the tornado went through was it before you got there? How much time passed between the tornado and your arrival to that area?
I would say within an hour, maybe more, like 30 minutes, 45 minutes, because we left Carl Junction, and I would say probably an hour after the tornado, because like we were probably getting, my wife was getting texts from our daughter. And of course, the tornado happened at, like, I don't want to say it was 5:22 or something like that.
Yeah, right around that time. Yeah.
So I would say within an hour, maybe less.
Do you remember the first thing you saw that really drove home what had happened? Because you often hear people say this, and I had the same experience, where you're driving into Joplin and everything, looks pretty much normal. And then it's almost all of a sudden, there's just this colossal destruction. Was that your experience, or you're driving in and, I mean, you could see that a storm had gone through and probably tree limbs were down and things were jostled around. And then sort of all of a sudden, there's this tableau of destruction in front of you? Or how was it for you, that very first sight of what had happened?
Well, if you look on a map, it was like almost a straight path across town. I want to say it was about a mile wide and 6 miles long.
Yeah,
And so at this part, which was one of the worst places. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know if it would get hit and jumped a little bit, and then at this point it was just traveling along. But as we drove into town, the path we took and parked, I'm sure we could maybe see a little bit of destruction because it's kind of down on a little bit of a hill where we parked, and then we walked up the hill a
yeah,
little bit. And so it's like, I don't know that we saw much until we got out of our car and really started walking up the hill a little bit. And then of course you're taking it in. And like I said, you're just in awe. And I don't know that I remember either one of us saying much to each other than like, oh my gosh, or like, wow, look at this. And
yeah.
then, as I said, I just remember this, as soon as I stepped onto the other side of 15th Street, it was just like a movie set. It was just so surreal. And like, this can't be true. This can't be real.
Yeah, it is unbelievable. That Walmart, was demolished, right? That report was correct.
Yeah.
Um, what was your destination? When you arrived, where were you
We were
going?
going to, I don't remember the exact street address, but they lived on 18th Street, 15th Street. If you would have if instead of walking across 15th Street and going up Connecticut to 18th, if we would have just taken a left and gone 6 blocks up, that tees into where Walmart was. So we went up 3 more blocks and then back like a block or block and a half towards Walmart.
Okay. And at this point, were you just sort of looking to see what had happened? Did you have a particular goal in mind other than to see, generally what had happened in town?
Well, I was taking it in, but my whole time I was just like, just praying that my parents would be alive. Because I mean, like the destruction, I wasn't seeing any bodies or anything like that. I don't really remember seeing people that looked like they were hurt. Everybody definitely looked dazed and in shock.
Yeah,
Whether you were, in it there, or people coming in to help, or people coming in and looking for people. I mean, everybody seemed to be, really, there was no joy around.
right. Yeah,
For
yeah.
sure.
So you would describe the people you saw as kind of dazed or in shock?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As you're making, now, are you making your way to your parents' home?
Yes.
Is that where you're heading?
Yeah.
On the way there, um, are there any particular sights or sounds or any other things that really stick in your memory as you're making your way? People will, I mean, one person describes an SUV wrapped around a pole,
Mhm.
a boat up in a tree, this sort of
Mhm.
thing. Is there anything that really sticks in your mind as you remember that walk?
I just know there was a lot of trees down and just mass destruction everywhere. I don't remember any
Yeah,
specific details, but I think
yeah,
I was just so focused on finding out if my parents were alive. And then I didn't know if my niece, but she lived in the house with my parents. She was in college at the time. And but she, had a busy schedule and worked and would spend time with her boyfriend and, doing stuff. So she may or may not have been at home at that time on a Sunday. She might have
yeah.
been in a church or something. But my parents were older and they didn't go very many places. And my dad went to Walmart a lot. But that was very close. So
To the super
um,
center that's right there.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Um,
So you're quiet. I imagine there's a feeling of apprehension, a pit in the stomach sort of thing,
Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I would say dread.
just because of what you were seeing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Um, so I mean, at this point, I think we're at the place in your story now where I'm kind of reluctant to ask specific questions. Let me just put it this way: you get, well, a lot of people say one of the challenges after the tornado in these areas that were heavily destroyed is that you kind of knew where you were, but not really, because property
That's
is all
yeah.
mixed up, homes are mixed up, the rubble is jumbled. Did it take you a while to to find the home, or were you able to do that pretty
Well,
easily?
we walked up the street. We knew what street to go up,
Yeah,
going back east.
yeah.
But I remember, I think the only reason why I knew the house is my sister yelled our names and called, my name and my brother's name, because her and her husband were already there looking through the rubble. And otherwise we would have walked right past the house, because we were just like looking around and taking it in. And like there wasn't where their block was. I think there was maybe one house or two houses that weren't like leveled or like were so destroyed or in a state of destruction that was like hard to even recognize them. So
Yeah. So you knew you were in the right area, but
right.
finding the
Was
specific house was a harder thing.
Yeah, I mean, like before you just drive right up to it. You've been there many
Sure.
times, you didn't even have to think about it, because you're just, on autopilot or whatever. Yeah, this time it was like, if no one had been there, I think I would have, gone up and down a little bit, kind of pacing out and looking for driveways and all, and
Right.
in order to find the right one.
And it was your sister, you said, whose voice you
Yeah,
heard?
my sister and brother-in-law were there, and I think my brother's youngest daughter and her husband were there too. I want to say there was, and there might have been some other people helping out too that just were jumping in and helping, but I know Lori and Aaron and their husbands were there. Lori's my sister, and she's the one that died of a heart attack the 2 mornings later, and she's counted in the 161 people.
She is.
Yeah,
It's Lori.
yeah.
Oh, how old was Lori?
She was 57.
57. And I'm sorry, she's the one who called you? Or
Well, she yelled out our names.
she's the one who yelled out your names
Yeah.
from that place. Um, so I'd love to hear more about Lori. What do you remember about what the house, or what had been the house, what it looked like? So for example, in some cases, you've got a foundation and a closet, and that's it.
There
In
was
some
only the
cases, you've got a
foundation.
foundation and a toilet. I'm
There
sorry.
was there was only the foundation. There was the cinder block exterior. We know that the foundation had been laid on top of them, the framing and all. There was the concrete pad of the driveway and then the garage. But I mean, there was no standing walls. It was all just now that the rock underneath, the crawl space of the subfloor and then there was still there. But that was it. I mean, and that area was pretty clean of debris, and then everything else, the yard and it was all commingled with everybody else's. I mean, like it wasn't like I'm sure some of my mom's death, I heard people say that, as far as ways almost to Springfield, Missouri, there was trash that was found, and belongings of people. So the storm carried things long ways, that's like
Yeah.
57, 60 miles from Joplin. So,
Wow.
yeah.
So folks were picking through the rubble, working through the rubble. Were they calling out names as well? Or just
Well,
calling
the first
out?
thing I want to know is like, where were my parents? And she proceeds to tell me that my niece was at home and her and my mom were picked up by somebody. They came out of my niece crawled underneath the house and was hugging an interior wall. And my mom made it to the garage and was getting in the backseat of the car to get a flashlight. And then she was going to go, you had to go around the house to the side. And there was like a door that swung out from the foundation
Yeah.
and you could crawl underneath there. And at that point, it was probably a good 4 feet of height. But then as you went across, it got narrower and narrower.
Yeah.
And so Lauren had already gone underneath the house when the storm was coming through. And then my mom, went to the bedroom door. It was like a hallway, 3 bedrooms, about a 1,200 square foot house, and
Yeah.
their bedroom was at the end. And my dad was putting together a shoe caddy. They'd only lived in the house for, I don't know, 6 months, maybe a year, and they're just older people, and you take your time on doing things. And like they went to Lowe's, which is a good thing they weren't still at Lowe's, because they might have, neither one of them made it through, and
Right.
bought a shoe caddy to organize her shoes. And it was just a little small little wooden, like I think 3 shelf with like cubby holes in it. And he
Sure.
was putting that together. And so she asked him if he was going to go get her at the house, because the storm was so bad, and probably tornado. He's like, no, I'm not going anywhere. And he didn't move well and couldn't bend his knees much anymore. And like, it would have been impossible for him to get her underneath there.
Right.
So she's like, well, I'm going to go ahead and get her underneath the house, but I want a flashlight. So we told her there was one in the car. So she went back through the house and into the garage and opened up the door and was reaching in to get the flashlight. And she told me herself that as she did that, the garage was starting to lift away and be sucked away.
Wow.
And so the storm or something closed the door on her, and she fell in the back seat, but she still had her legs outside the door, and the door was going back and forth on her legs, and she said she could feel it spinning.
The
And
car.
she didn't know, yeah. She didn't know how long that was happening, and then it stopped, and the car was vertical to the garage in the yard. But part of it was like sitting on a concrete pad. So if you drove in the garage like this, the car was then vertical. So it's spun around however many times, and where it stopped, it was pointing like if you drove, you would drive through the house. Of course, it wasn't, drivable anymore.
Yeah.
And so she got out, but her legs were bleeding and hurt. She had abrasions and all.
Because
and
the door had been slamming against her legs when she was in the car.
Right. And Lauren was right there just a few feet away. And so they found each other immediately, but they didn't know where my dad was. And they were looking around, but like they didn't know, And so they had just a little bit of a slanting driveway, and someone came up the street and said, do you all need help? And or no, I think they walked up the street and someone told them that people were meeting at a park. It's called Parr Hill Park. And so they were headed there, and I think somebody picked them up and like pulled up beside them, like, do you guys need help? And of course, they had debris in their hair, and like, clothes were all, wet. It was raining and all.
Sure.
So they had taken them to their house nearby, and they showered and got cleaned up, and I don't think I didn't see them that day, because we were only there. Lori had told me the story, what all happened. These people had them and that they were safe. I don't know how maybe my mom had her. No, she didn't have her cell phone. I don't know. Somehow she knew this. And so they were going through, debris looking for my dad, because they didn't know where he was at. He was still not known. So, and then she was also picking up anything that was salvageable, and like putting it in this pile for them, but like the whole purpose was to find him.
Sure.
And so we were all looking, and of course the storm, it was not a sunny day. It wasn't, it was still stormy or clouding,
still raining, and yeah.
I don't remember rain at that time, but it didn't take long, and another thunder cell was going through and starting to rain. You could hear thunder and all, and plus it was getting really dark. There's no city lights or anything, so you would have natural light coming from other places other than just the sky, and it was getting so dark. It was just dangerous. And so I told my wife, I was like, we need to go ahead and leave. And my brother's like, I think we're going to leave too, because I agree with you. I think it's dangerous. People could get cut or whatever.
Wow.
I mean, like, it was just dangerous. And so my sister was frantic to find my dad. And so I think I don't remember if my niece and her husband were going to go ahead and leave then too, but she was getting kind of upset with this, like, why aren't you going to stay? And like, you can't hardly see anymore. It's basically dark. It's thundering. It's starting to storm again. It's not safe here.
You've got jagged edges and nails everywhere. And
there's glass and metal and just all kinds of, it's like, we're going to get hurt. We have to stop, and we can all come back tomorrow, So I think they end up stopping pretty soon after we left. I don't know. They had some flashlights. I didn't think to take a flashlight or anything. So, so anyway, we went ahead and went home, my wife and I.
How long would you say, but you still hadn't found your father?
Yeah. No.
How long would you say you were there before you arrive, you do this work, and then you leave? How long would you say? How much time would you say had passed?
I would say hour,
Yeah,
because about to be, if we got there about 6:30, 7:30, yeah, I would say about an hour. I think it was getting dark enough by then with the storm and all that between 7:30 and 8, I'm sure
sure.
we left, because by then it would have been pretty much dark, you know.
You said that going in, you had a feeling of dread. That's the word you use. Um, you found your mom. Um, Lori's there. Um, how would you describe your own state of mind, your own sort of state of being, at this point in the story?
I remember being really emotional, kind of in shock, but like just, I mean, the dread wasn't leaving. I mean, I think at this point I knew that my dad had perished, but you're just hoping, that
Mhm.
that's not true. But like it didn't go away, because like we went home and I don't remember what we did. I mean, it was early. We don't go to bed until, um, you know, 11, 12, probably. And then of course the news is going, and so we're watching everything in the news and taking it all in, and like, and I'm constantly praying and like, hoping that he's okay. My sister kept saying, well, maybe he, was, somewhere, and like he's wandering around. Somebody's going to find him, like
Mhm.
mom, and they're going to take him to a clinic or take him to, there was a makeshift hospital that was being formed and all. And the one main hospital, Freeman, was overwhelmed. I
Right.
think they were actually sending people to other hospitals in the
I
area.
think so. Yeah.
So
I
you just,
imagine you didn't get much sleep that night.
no, well, it took me quite a while. I remember laying in bed and it was still storming and raining and seeing some lightning and all. And just like, I don't know, Preston, I just kind of remember just like, you just need to let go of this and just trust that God's taking care of him, wherever he's at, And
Yeah.
then my thought was like, and if he's not here anymore, then he's in the best place ever,
Yeah.
And then I think of that, like this peace just kind of washed over me, and I went ahead and went to sleep. And,
Hmm.
you
By the
know,
time you left, to go back home for the night, were first responders out? Do you,
oh
do
yeah,
you-
there was emergency service, and
right.
you could, you know, I don't remember specifically like people like on bullhorns talking and everything, but you knew lots of help was all around everywhere. And there was, I don't ever remember anybody being hurt though, or like seeing people
Like seeing
bloody or
that?
anything like that. I
Do you
just,
do you have a recollection of, so you have the professionals, the first responders, police, fire, EMTs who come. Do you have a recollection of locals who are converging, from parts of Joplin that hadn't been hurt, locals sort of immediately converging and doing whatever they could to help move rubble? And of course, that will certainly begin the next day. I'm wondering if you have any recollections of seeing that even that evening.
I don't, I know I don't have any recollection. I do know that many, well, like Samaritan's Purse and
Sure.
many organizations came and were here for quite a while,
Oh,
several weeks.
yeah, it was just an incredible outpouring. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
So, but at that point, I think I would imagine a lot of people were en route, and if as far as the organizations, and so the people probably around were people from that neighborhood,
Right.
or like their family and friends, or they're deep. I know well, we had a couple we went to church with. We moved to Florida, and in 2002, and then moved back in August of 8. And we had a couple we went to church with that they ended up coming up here. It was, I don't know, 6 weeks or so afterwards, and they spent a week. They had a travel trailer, and they brought their two kids and did some volunteer work. I know they were here at least a week, and we got together with them once or maybe twice. They
Yeah.
just wanted to come up and help, and you heard a lot of stories of people
Oh,
from the
sure.
neighborhood that either on their own and they just came and said, hey, sign me up and put me where you need me, or there was a
Right.
lot of organizations that brought help.
Yeah, and I mean that begins the next day. You're almost done with your studies at John Brown University in Northwest Arkansas, and I know that The very next day, there were folks at John Brown that were already mobilizing and
Yeah.
heading to Joplin. Well, take us to the morning of May 23. What's the next chapter?
Well, I woke up and I think I talked to my brother, and he said that he was heading there. They had some things that we're going to do. My mom was at my sister's house. My mom and niece, they went to Lori's house to spend the night. Or they might have went and got, maybe Lori and Kyle went and got them when they left, my parents' property. I don't remember those details, but I knew she was there. And I already knew this from the night before that she was there.
Yeah.
And she was really, upset, and like, so we didn't go over and see her that night. We just decided, maybe it wouldn't be good.
Yeah.
Anyway, just gets sad. I don't know that any of them slept that night personally. I know my sister didn't, but so I talked to my brother, and they were going to go over, and so I was going to go too. And then our youngest daughter called my wife and said that her husband, my son-in-law, wanted to go with me, but it was going to be 30 minutes or so before he could get. And he said, well, I'll meet you at your house. And so I was like, I remember being a little bit perturbed because, like, well, I want to go and go now, and I want to wait for you. But I was like, okay, maybe it's better that I wait for him. So we did. And so he came over to our house, and then I just hopped in his car and we drove, and we parked at the same place. Now we went to my sister-in-law's house first. I don't know why. I don't know, she was messaging my wife or something, I can't remember. And so she wanted us to come by. So we went to her house first, and then she got in the car, and she lived probably, I don't know, maybe a short mile north of my parents. And so we drove her through a little bit of the damage. And like, as you would go towards Walmart, there was a few houses in there that were damaged, but then, like, again, 15th Street was the big divider line. And so we just drove a little bit up and down 15th Street, and like, she was just in shock, and and then we left and went, and I think maybe it was storming, and that's why we went to Becky's house first. I can't remember, but we went ahead. I think the storm kind of subsided, so we went back to the school district office and parked, and the storm picked up again. So I remember sitting there in the car waiting for it to kind of subside, because there was thunder and lightning. It wasn't safe to get out at that point. And I think we were there, I don't know, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And then finally it was like, I couldn't take it anymore. It's like, I'm going, I'm not waiting anymore. I don't care if I get wet,
Sure.
So we just, went ahead and got out and went back to the house.
Yeah.
And I remember walking up the street and going underneath a couple of trees and just praying, like, Lord, I don't know anything about search and rescue. Please send help. And then if he is here and is not somewhere in a clinic or a hospital, something we don't know about it, then please help us find him fast. It was just two-part prayer. And so we walked up the driveway, and of course I had some familiarity after being there, 12, 14 hours before.
Yeah.
And I just kind of walked the whole property, I think twice, and just kind of like prayer walking it, and like asking, I just felt like I was getting oriented, and like, I don't know, being present in the space, I guess.
Sure.
And at one point, like, if this was the garage right in front of me, off to the right was a small tree that was bent over, and I was standing underneath this tree, and I just stopped and just was just an earnest prayer, and like, okay, Lord, where is he at? And I looked down, and there was this piece of styrofoam that was down in the rubble. It was kind of, had some stuff on top of it. I could touch it. So I reached down in there, I could put my hands around it, and I couldn't budge it. It was like a piece of concrete. I was so frustrated. And I remember thinking, what is wrong with you? Why can you not move a piece of styrofoam? Are you that weak? And I stood up, and I remember having a little bit of tears, and just anger just flooded me. And then I thought, this is not a good emotion to have. You need to clear your mind. And so I just took some deep breaths and just said, where is he? And instantly I heard, so close. It's like somebody was talking to me in my head and I heard the word so close.
Wow.
It's like, wow, okay. I mean, I knew it was Jesus, I knew it. And so I remember going back around the backyard another time and stopping at the edge of the concrete back wall where would have been the back wall, and then there would have been a door that would go out in the backyard, and they had a 3-tiered deck that stepped out in the yard. It was super nice, redwood deck, and my toes were at the seam of the concrete in the deck. And I was just scanning the horizon. I remember seeing St. John's and like thinking, I should not be able to see that hospital. It was
Right.
miles away, but it was just as clear as a day because I knew that
Just 'cause
place.
everything had been leveled.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could see across town.
Yeah. And so my son-in-law, I remember looking over to my right, and he was walking along the cinder blocks of the outside foundation, like across the house, even though the house wasn't there. And I looked up back at that tree and I was just like, okay, let's make a plan. And so I said, come here, Josh. And I said, I want to start underneath that tree. I didn't tell him about the prayer, didn't tell him about so close. I said, I just want to start there. And I said, the whole area here that is the crawl space of the house just has gravel and, the rock and all. I said, it makes sense to me to grab stuff from there and put it in here, because otherwise you're just stacking and removing piles and all. And we're just going to grab stuff from there and start throwing it in here. And that's where we're going to start looking. And he was like, okay, that sounds like a good plan. So that's what we start doing.
Yeah.
And we were working together maybe, I don't know, 10 minutes. It was not very long at all. And I heard this voice said, Carrie. And I looked, and this woman, and it was raining lightly. And she had her jacket with the hood up over her head. And her face looked a little familiar, but I could not think of who she was. And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, she said her name, and now honestly I can't remember, but she said, hey, it's me, from Carterville Christian, which is where we went to church. I'm like, oh, hey, I said, I knew I'd recognize you, but with the rain and the hood and all. And she's like, no, I understand. She said, we're over here like a block away, a bunch of people helping this family who really needs help bad. And some of the people are from College Heights Christian Church, but there's some people from Carterville. And so I'm going around seeing if we could get more help. And so I remember instantly thinking like, well, I would help you normally, but like, I need to find my dad too. And so this is what I said to her. I said, well, I would love to help you, but like, this is my dad's house and my parents' house, and, he's still missing. She's like, oh, okay. I hope you find him. And like, she just turned around and walked off. Well, she went back and told the people there, and 4 of the guys working there came over and helped us.
Wow.
So my 2-part prayer was send help and let us find him fast. And we already had 4 people helping us. So 2 multiplied to 6.
Yeah.
So David was one of the guys I knew. The other, I don't think I knew the other 3. They might have been just people who went to church there. I never met them, or from the College Heights Christian Church.
Right.
So he's like, well, what are you guys doing? And so I explained exactly what we're doing. So I don't know. I don't remember the other 2 guys and what they were doing, but David was working with Josh and I, and Josh was grabbing something, putting it to David, and then David was tossing it to me, and I was throwing the house. It was like a daisy chain.
Yeah.
Well, somehow it changed, and Josh was handing stuff to me, and I was handing it to David. So I got more in the middle. And I remember we weren't working very long at all. I don't remember, honestly, I couldn't give you a time factor, but it wasn't long.
Right.
And Josh was throwing something to me, but David had positioned himself where it was like a triangle like this, and this is where the tree was, and David was over here, and I was at this point and towards the house and the area where we were throwing stuff. I remember stopping and looking at David and following his eyes, and he was zoned in on the spot right underneath the tree. And Josh wasn't right there for some reason. Maybe he had grabbed something because there was nobody around, but David it was like he was looking at this point, and I followed his eyes, and all of a sudden, like out of all the rubble, I could see this patch that looked like it was skin, flesh. And so I took like 3 leaps, and I was right there, and that my dad's shirt was up over his face. And so I pulled it down, and he just looked like his eyes were just a tiny bit open, and he just looked like he was resting. He had a huge gas in his gash in his chin. But I mean, he wasn't bloody anywhere or anything.
Mhm.
And I mean, I knew it was him. And of course, David came and met me and was like holding my shoulders because that I started breaking down. But when I looked down, that piece of styrofoam was right against his leg, like his thigh.
Oh, wow.
I was probably standing on top of him when I said that prayer, and I heard so close.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I looked up and our worship minister was right in front of us, right in front of my face. His name's Brad, and we go to church. We've both gone to a different church, but we go to the same church together now. And he's like, Carrie, are you okay? And I just, kind of collapsed in his arms. And we stood there for a couple minutes, and there was a huge tree stump. It was already there. It was been cut down, and it was like between my parents' yard and the neighbors right beside them. And so we went over and sat on it, and we're facing towards where my dad was. And David, I remember he found a sheet or something and he put it over him. And I remember looking in the street behind, you could see an ambulance coming in. Of course, I know they're coming to verify and, collect the body.
Wow.
So we're sitting there on the stump, and Brad's on my left, I'm on the center. And my son-in-law was like, crouched down beside us. I don't think there was big enough for all three of us to sit there, or I guess I just didn't move over and line the spot to sit. I don't know. I don't remember that. I
Mm.
remember watching this and taking it in, and all of a sudden in my head, I could hear like angels singing "Jesus Loves Me," the little kids song. And
Yeah.
so I turned to Brad and I said, Brad, I hear the song "Jesus Loves Me" in my head, and it's like angels are singing it. He's like, well, let's sing with them. And so we sat there and sang "Jesus Loves Me," and they, next thing you know, people were coming up, the emergency people, and they had this, the board thing that they load people on. And
Wow.
yeah. So I want to say from the time we got there until when this happened was no more, it wasn't even an hour. I think it was more like 40 minutes, 45 minutes.
So they put your dad on the ambulance or in the ambulance then, um, and what do those of you at the house then do at that point?
Well, my brother got there real quick. I think he got there before they had the body in the body bag. And
Yeah.
it was, I think, I don't know. Honestly, at that point, it really gets a blur, and I
Sure.
don't, details are really foggy. I mean, I didn't feel like I was in shock or anything, but I know now,
You must have been.
looking back, I definitely was, because I mean, what I knew, honestly, deep down inside was true. I didn't want to admit was true. And then it was just, it's right there in your
Yeah.
face, you got to start dealing with it.
How in your mind have you thought about these things, processed these things? Because the story that you're telling is that it's I don't know if paradox is the right word, but you have this tragic event, um, the loss of your dad, a couple of days later, the loss of it's your sister Lori.
Yeah.
Um, this, just mind-boggling devastation. But then you've related a number of things that you feel that, Jesus spoke to you, your dad is close. Um, the, getting back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, folks, three of whom you don't know, four folks, you don't know three of them, they come to your house to help you. There's that, that tsunami of aid where people are just helping one another.
Mhm.
The impulse to sing Jesus Loves Me, and now you've got these folks singing this together. Uh, I'm having trouble formulating the question, but you've got this devastation and this tragedy, but then you also have this, it sounds like, a sense that within that there's still something hopeful, there's still something light, or there is light in this darkness. Does that resonate with you at all?
Well, I just, I would attribute it to Holy Spirit and how he's with us always and is our great companion and our comforter and is, guiding and leading us. And like he was present, there, and he knows our pain more than anybody, he understands us more than anybody because he created us,
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, I think it was just all him.
Did you hear stories after the storm of the butterfly people?
Yeah, so many. Yeah.
You heard a
People
lot
say
of
that.
those stories.
Yeah. Yeah. The one
Just for folks who aren't familiar with that, can you just relate what that is? Because I mean, what you didn't mention the butterfly people, but in a way, it sounds like a similar phenomenon, maybe.
well, from my knowledge and understanding, it was children that
Yeah,
would see the butterfly people. And the story that stands out in my mind that I verified with a buddy from church that we know each other well. And this was probably at least 5-6 years after the tornado. But the all the emergency responders, they had the radios on their shoulders, but they can hear back and forth. And like if you had the radio on, you could hear anything from anywhere, probably around Joplin. They're on
sure.
the same channel, or they're maybe moving to different channels. I don't know. But this emergency responder, I don't know if he was fire or police, was working, and they gave a description of a 3-year-old little boy and described the shirt and the pants and that he was on and that he was missing. And so within a few minutes, this emergency responder saw him, and like he said, it matched the description. And so he went up to him, like, I don't know if what his name was, if they said his name, like, and asked him. He's like, yes, that was his name. And he wasn't like upset or anything. He was just walking along the street. And I don't remember if he picked him up or what, but the little boy told him that a butterfly man picked him up and set him down. And that's because he said, well, how did you get here? Because he was, I think, I don't know, a long ways away from a mile, half a mile. I mean, a distance. It was a long distance. And with all the rubble and everything for a 3-year-old, to no scratches on him or anything at all, that was crazy. And so my buddy, who is a police officer, and he was one of the first, he had 3 tours in Iraq and
Wow.
and Desert Storm and all. And so he knows, devastation and all, and then had advanced training. And so he was one of the people that did a lot of search and rescues and helped pull out a lot of bodies and all.
Sure.
And so he verified that story and said yes, and there was many
Yeah.
others like it.
Yeah, and I think usually the butterfly people are interpreted as angels. I
Yes.
think that's so. It's an interesting case because it's one of the most devastating tornadoes in American history. Um, Awful and tragic. But then there are these stories, there are these stories, the butterfly story, what you've shared, just this impulse to sing Jesus Loves Me in that context. And then really the incredible outpouring of help that pours into Joplin, overwhelmingly from churches. There were, some secular groups, but overwhelmingly from churches.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting contrast of dark and light, that story. Um, which doesn't at all, of course, minimize the pain of what happened to your family. What was your dad's name?
Charles. Everybody called him Chuck, but his formal name, given name, was Charles.
Yeah. And Lori, now she died, you said, of a heart attack a couple days later.
Well, I think after my brother called, I think my sister ended up calling me too. Maybe it got through the family, and so she called me too. And I said, yes, we have found him. And I think she just had to have somebody tell her that definitely he was gone. She was daddy's little girl, even though she was the first out of 5 in the family. She was a daddy's little girl for sure. And of course she just started crying and wailing and and then I understand, I do. But I think we left there after finding my dad, and well, Tim and my sister-in-law came, and I think they came with Erin and her husband, and they might have started going and looking through some stuff. I was just like, had no energy at all. I could not hardly move or anything. It's like I'm going home, you know. I
Yeah.
I didn't have any strength in me to do any work at that point.
Yeah.
And so we went home, or Josh took me home, and I don't think he was there very long. And then I think I showered and cleaned up because, like, you know, it was kind of dirty.
Yeah.
And then we went over to my sister's house and spent the rest of that day. And my mom, of course, this is the first time to see my mom after the tornado, and my niece too. And there was already some family there. I can't remember, aunt and uncle or some cousins, and like, and some people I didn't know, and just friends of the family. You know how people just start pouring out love and lots of food and all. And my sister was going through stuff and like washing stuff, and like my mom crocheted a lot. She had a bunch of like crocheted like lap blankets, and she gave them out a lot to presents and gifts to people. And so Lori had found some of those. Of course, they're wet and had debris in them, so she was washing those and drying them. And she had set up a folding table on her porch, and was like, anything that had any value, she was hosing it off and cleaning off and wiping stuff and just organizing. And then she was in the house making food, and then she'd be out. Like, she was, if I hadn't had the knowledge that I have now, then I would have said she definitely needs to be rushed to the hospital, because she was in emotional distress. She was not being stable. One minute she'd be laughing hysterically, like, oh my gosh, something so funny. And then she'd go right into, you know, crumbling and into tears and emotion. And then a little bit later, she'd be sitting there and just like a zombie. You know, she was in distress, you know, badly. And so, but I remember when we left, I can't remember what time it was, later in the evening. I think it was dark already, so it was pretty late.
Yeah.
She gave me a kiss and a hug and said, "Thank you so much for finding Daddy." You know,
Wow.
and like, I mean, I was like, "Well, you're welcome." I'm like, but I mean, he's my dad too, and like, you know, it's not like, you know, I don't know, but she just said thank you, and it was just her way of showing love, you know, and like,
Yeah.
but then she didn't sleep all night long. I I think that night was harder to sleep than the first night, when I didn't know where it was at, because I knew. And then like, you're dealing with the grief and everything that's happening. And then like, you know, by this time, you know how much the damage was. And this is my I feel like my hometown. I was born in Neosho, Missouri, but my parents lived or moved to Joplin, and when I was a little bit less than a year old, you know, like 10 days for my first birthday. Went to school here, grew up here. This is my hometown. And that was one of the things that was really hard for me going forward, because it wasn't just losing my dad and my sister. It was like home was destroyed, because like huge portion of the city was basically gone, and like a lot of people's lives were lost.
Yeah.
Businesses were lost, homes, you know, just so much loss. So it was really hard to sleep that night. And the next morning, my phone rang. We had a home phone at the time, and I had a cell phone, and the home phone was right beside my bed. And so I picked it up, and it was this woman's voice, but it was all garbled, and like they weren't talking coherently. And I was like, hello, hello. And then I went ahead and hung up, and then it rang again, but nobody was there. And then just a few minutes later, it was a little bit of a delay, but then my phone rang, and it was my mom, and she was just hysterical. And her sister's collapsed on the porch. You know, 911 is coming. You know, we don't know what's wrong with her. And so I raced to their house. And when I got there, the ambulance was working on her and doing CPR and all. And they went ahead and loaded her in the ambulance, and were continuing to work on her. But like, it had already been, because for me to get to her house was at least a normal like 15-minute drive. I mean, I probably got there in a lot less time because I was going really fast. But I rode with my brother-in-law and followed behind the ambulance to the hospital.
Wow.
And it was an eternity before they came out, and they're like, you know, we couldn't save her, you know, she's passed. So, but they knew it was a heart attack.
And is the assumption that because of the stress of the previous few days, that's, you know, so she's included among the 161 listed as dying in the tornado?
Yeah, on her obituary, that's what was put on there: stress-induced heart attack.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're 11 years on now, and you're studying to be a counselor, is that right? You're just about done?
Yeah.
So you spend a lot of time thinking about psychological processes and all of that. Um, so what do you do with all of this 11 years later? Um, maybe it's unfair just to throw that at you that way, but
No.
in your own mind, I mean, what did you say on May 22nd? What were you doing when the word came, the tornado? You told me at
We
the
were at
outset.
home and I was on the phone talking to a telemarketer. My wife was,
Right, you're
yeah,
talking to a telemarketer,
yeah.
and then within the next 48 hours, your life is, I mean, just takes this incredible turn. Um, so 11 years after, you know what? How have you processed all of this? What do you do with this?
Well, one of the
What
things I
work
did
do you put
with,
these memories?
within, I want to say within a couple of months, I took up running. I needed to get healthier and lose some weight, but the emotional pain was just, I was just not coping well. And so I decided to start running to get, because I would go out running and like that pain and the emotional pain, I had to focus on one or the other. I couldn't focus on both at the same time.
Hmm.
So it was a way to switch gears. And it was a big part of the way I healed because I'm very much a person that likes to form community. And so I found some people that were runners. And then there was this man that started a faith-based running group. And this developed over the next couple of years. And
Hmm.
I ended up running 2 marathons and I don't know how many half marathons and did a 25K on a trail. And like I ran 6 days a week,
Yeah.
uh, it just was a big part of my healing process. And then we have the Joplin Memorial Run, and I've been in it every year except for 3. I wasn't able to be in it this year because I'm having some hip issues.
Oh,
And then I've got like a spiritual son that lives down in the Dallas Fort Worth area and goes to Gateway, and they have a men's conference. And so he invited me um, to come to that. And the 2 years I went, instead of staying at home and being part of the race, were just years that he was struggling and things were going on. So I just knew that was the right thing to do. And like, I mean, you just have to make choices, and I knew that's what God wanted me to do. So
sure.
that race would be another milestone, and a year went by, and you're learning to continue. And like, I thoroughly believe that life is about the living, and we have people that's gone before us, and like when we have faith, we will be together forever. And I, it's a choice for me. I could be sad and concentrate on them not being part of my life anymore, or I can enjoy the life I have now. And I have times when I miss them, but I really try to channel any of those kind of emotions. Not that they're bad emotions, but I just don't want to dwell on those. And so I just push that forward, and like, I'm going to see them again someday. And I always think as a runner now,
Hmm.
running all these races, and then scriptures, especially Paul's writings on, running a race, like we each have to finish our race strong.
Hmm.
And I say all the time, as long as you stay in the race, then you're good. You just can't drop out of the race. You can't sit down on the side of the trail or the road, whatever you want to describe it, and say, I give up. You have to keep in the race. So I'm in the race, and I'm going to do my best to finish my race strong, because then that means I'll get to be with them again.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I
Wow.
mean, most of the time I'm good. I mean, I believe Joplin, Missouri, if you could see this city and without the tornado and see it with, it is so much better. I mean, a lot of the neighborhoods that were destroyed were poor housing, poor homes, and insurance money's come in, and they're super nice homes now. There's
Right.
still some areas that haven't rebuilt, but I mean, you give it time and businesses and houses will come in. Um, I think there's lots of healing that's happened here. So much help came in lots of ways. It wasn't just only in rebuilding, infrastructure, but a lot of, emotional support and help too. I got into counseling for 3 years, and the first, part of the counseling was for grief, and then it went deeper into like a deep issue that I had in my life, and then that's one of the big things that brought me to a place where I decided to to go back to school and become a counselor myself, you know? So, I mean, that, I don't know that without the tornado, might have still made this decision, but I mean, that's a big element. And so that's a big fruit, a positive out of it, you know?
Sure.
So I
Yeah,
just, and I believe that's how God is. The light always overcomes the darkness. And you
yeah.
know what the enemy means for evil, God turns around and makes it good.
Well,
So,
as you describe it, I do think, and again, you don't say this to minimize or take away from the tragedy of the event, but
oh no,
what you describe, you know, you can see it, the new homes that are there, the new neighborhoods. It is a kind of resurrection.
yeah,
And one of the things that's just very inspiring to me is, and I witnessed this at the time and have talked to a lot of people since, just the convergence on Joplin of just thousands and thousands of people who came to help. That's a very inspiring thing.
amazing.